Good morning, Virgo. There are moments in a person's life that arrive without announcing themselves properly. Moments where something shifts, not gradually, not with the slow build that allows the mind time to adjust, but suddenly. In the way that a room changes when a window is thrown open and everything that was settled is briefly, completely rearranged. And some of you right now may be standing in the middle of exactly that kind of moment. Something has changed, or is in the process of changing, or is approaching with an energy that your nervous system has already registered, even if your conscious mind hasn't quite caught up yet. There's a reason you're here. There's a reason this particular reflection found you on this particular day. And if you're willing to sit with that reason rather than move past it, something genuinely important might surface. If you felt called to this today, I think some part of you already knows that something is in motion. A theme appearing strongly in this reflection is the energy of an unexpected revelation. Not unexpected in the sense that it came from nowhere, because when you look back honestly, the seeds of it were almost certainly present long before the moment of recognition arrived. But unexpected in the way that a truth sometimes hides in plain sight until the precise instant when the light shifts and suddenly it is the most obvious thing in the room. Something that was always there, always true, always quietly shaping the landscape of your situation, finally stepping in to full visibility. And the experience of that kind of recognition can feel in the moment almost physical, like the ground briefly tilting, like a breath you didn't realize you were holding being released all at once. An energy that may be present for many of you right now is the particular disorientation that comes not from bad news, but from significant news. From information or awareness or clarity that is genuinely consequential that requires you to update something, to revise a picture you've been holding, to reconsider an assumption that may have been quietly organizing your decisions, your expectations, or your understanding of a particular person or situation. And here is what's worth naming about that kind of disorientation. It doesn't always feel comfortable, even when what's being revealed is ultimately something that serves you. Even good realizations can briefly knock the ground out from under a person simply by virtue of being real and requiring a response. A pattern that sometimes emerges at this threshold is a kind of internal scrambling, the mind trying to rapidly reprocess what it thought it understood. Old frameworks suddenly feeling insufficient for the new information being placed inside them. A sense of needing to sit down, not metaphorically, but literally, and simply breathe for a moment before any conclusions are drawn or any actions are taken. And an energy appearing here is a gentle but firm invitation to do exactly that, to resist the pull toward immediate reaction, to give yourself the gift of a moment of genuine stillness before you decide what this means and what, if anything, needs to happen next. This reflection invites you to consider what your first instinct tends to be when something significant and unexpected enters your awareness, whether you move toward it, away from it, or freeze, and whether that instinct has historically served you, or whether this moment might be calling for a different kind of response. Here's the thing about the moments that stop us, the ones that make us want to sit down. They rarely arrive at convenient times. They don't wait for us to be emotionally prepared or for our circumstances to be settled enough to absorb a disruption or for a version of ourselves that has done all the right inner work to be ready and waiting. They arrive in the middle of ordinary days, in the middle of ordinary weeks, with no particular regard for whether we feel equipped to receive them. And part of what determines how we move through them is not the shock of the arrival, but the quality of the ground we were standing on before they came, the work that was already done, the self knowledge that was already in place, the emotional reserves that were quietly building during all the moments that felt unremarkable. And what's interesting is that many of you have been building exactly that kind of ground. And perhaps without realizing that's what the quieter periods were for, perhaps without connecting the dots between the internal work of recent months and the capacity it was developing in you. But a pattern worth noticing here is that people rarely encounter moments that feel significant without also, somewhere beneath the surface, already having what they need to navigate them. The challenge tends not to be the resources, it tends to be trusting that those resources are actually there. And trust, real trust in your own interior capacity is something that can't be installed from the outside. It can only be discovered from within in exactly the kinds of moments that are asking something of you right now. There is a particular kind of strength that lives in people who have moved through disorienting moments before and found themselves on the other side more clear than they were before the disruption arrived. Not stronger in the way that means hardened or armored or less capable of being touched by what happens to them, but stronger in the way that means more rooted, more confident in the simple fact of their own continuity, more certain that whatever arrives, however unsettling the initial impact, they will process it, integrate it, and find their footing again. That kind of strength is quiet. It doesn't announce itself, but it shows up reliably in the moments that require it. And an energy present here suggests that many of you carry precisely that kind of strength, whether or not you've been recognizing it as such. This reflection invites you to consider what inner resources you have been quietly building in the calmer, less dramatic stretches of recent experience that you might be underestimating right now in this moment that is asking something larger of you. An energy that may be present in this reflection is also connected to the concept of rearrangement, not destruction, not loss, but rearrangement, the particular experience of a life that is reorganizing itself around a new understanding. And this distinction matters enormously because the initial feeling of disruption, of something being shaken loose, can very easily be misread as collapse when it is actually something far more generative. When a structure that was built on incomplete information begins to shift to accommodate a more complete picture, the shifting can feel destabilizing. But the structure that emerges on the other side of that shift tends to be more honest, more durable, more aligned with what is actually true, and therefore more capable of holding the weight of what comes next. There's something almost alchemical about this kind of rearrangement. The same raw material, the same person, the same life, the same connections and circumstances reorganized around a truer understanding. Suddenly capable of becoming something that the previous arrangement never quite allowed. And some of you may be at the very beginning of perceiving what that new arrangement might look like, not fully visible yet, still in the early stages of taking shape, but present in the way that a form is present in marble before it has been fully revealed, already there, already real, already complete in the dimension where things exist, before they become visible. This reflection invites you to consider what might become possible in your life if you allowed this moment of disruption to be not just something to survive, but something to genuinely learn from what the new arrangement might be, trying to make room for the old one couldn't quite accommodate. There is a particular kind of clarity that only becomes available after something you thought you understood turns out to be more complex than you realized. A clarity that couldn't have arrived earlier because it depends on the more complete picture that the revelation has now provided. And some of you are at the very beginning of that clarity right now, still in the first moments of it, still in the slightly breathless space between what you knew before and what you are only beginning to understand. And an energy appearing here is the suggestion that if you can resist the urge to immediately resolve that breathlessness, if you can stay in the complexity just a little longer than feels comfortable, something genuinely important will have the space to fully arrive. A theme worth sitting with here is the difference between a moment that feels urgent and a moment that actually requires urgency. Because some of what is being stirred right now has the texture of urgency, the racing quality, the sense that something must be decided immediately, that action must follow revelation without pause. But a pattern that sometimes emerges in moments like this is that the urgency itself is a kind of emotional weather, real and valid as a feeling, but not necessarily an accurate guide to what the situation actually requires. The feeling of urgency says move, decide, respond, act. And a quieter wisdom beneath it might be suggesting instead wait, absorb, understand before you respond. Let this land fully before you decide what it means. This reflection invites you to consider what the difference feels like in your body between genuine urgency that requires immediate action and the emotional intensity of a moment that is simply asking to be fully felt before anything else happens. And this is where it gets both tender and important, because moments that shake us, even the ones that ultimately move us towards something better, can surface older material, older fears, older patterns of response that were formed in previous chapters under previous pressures by a version of ourselves that was doing the best they could with what they had at the time. And when a significant shift arrives, it doesn't just ask us to respond to the present situation. It also illuminates the reflexes that were formed in the past, the ways we learned to protect ourselves, the ways we learned to manage disruption, the ways we learned to survive the moments when the ground moved beneath us. And some of those old reflexes, however useful they once were, may not be the most useful guides in this particular moment. And here is something that deserves to be said. with real care. The fact that an old reflex is no longer the most useful response doesn't mean it was ever wrong. It was, in all likelihood, exactly the right response to the situation that created it. It kept you safe, it kept you functioning. It allowed you to move through something that might otherwise have been impossible to move through. The problem is not the reflex itself. The problem is only when we allow it to arrive uninvited into situations that are genuinely different from the one that shaped it. When we apply yesterday's survival strategy to today's opportunity. When we protect ourselves against a threat that is no longer present with armor that is no longer necessary. An energy that may be present here is the invitation to notice those reflexes without being fully governed by them, to feel the pull of an old pattern while simultaneously asking, is this the response that actually serves me now? Is this the version of myself that I want to bring to this particular moment? Not with self criticism, not with the harshness of someone who expects themselves to have already outgrown every old way of being, but with the gentle, honest curiosity of someone who genuinely wants to respond to their current life from their current self, rather than from the accumulated protections of every difficult thing they've ever lived through. This reflection invites you to consider which version of yourself you want to be, the one who navigates this, the version formed in the hardest previous chapters, armored and reactive, or the version that has been quietly growing since then, more grounded, more honest, more capable of meeting complexity without needing to immediately resolve it. A theme appearing in the closing energy of this reflection is something that might be described as earned composure. Not the kind of composure that comes from nothing being wrong. Not the performed kind that exists to signal to others that you're handling things, but the deep rooted kind that comes from a person who has moved through difficult or disorienting things before and arrived every time on the other side with more self knowledge than they started with. That kind of composure isn't the absence of feeling, it coexists with the full weight of what's being felt. It simply refuses to be entirely overtaken by it. And it's worth asking yourself, honestly, without false modesty, how many times you have already done exactly that. How many times something arrived that felt impossible to absorb and you absorbed it anyway. How many times the ground shifted and you found your footing again. How many times the version of events you thought you understood revealed itself to be more complicated than you expected, and you updated your understanding and kept moving. That history is not nothing. That history is, in fact, the most reliable evidence available that you are capable of exactly what this moment is asking of you. Um, and some of you have more of that composure than you currently believe you do. The evidence is in the fact that you're here, present, reflective, willing to sit with something significant rather than simply reacting to it or running from it. That choice, however small it seems, is itself a form of the groundedness that this moment is asking for. Whatever is unfolding right now, whatever the revelation, whatever the shift, whatever the new information that is asking you to update your understanding of a person or a situation or a chapter of your own life, you are not required to have it resolved by the end of this day.